Hey, it's Deborah Boschert. I'm here to tell you about preparing supplies for my personal symbols for Art Quilt Collage workshop. Now, I do have kits available for this workshop, and there's a link below, but if you would like to bring your own supplies, I hope that this video will help you prepare and select your fabrics and threads and batting and all of those details. Great, so let's get started. Just as a review, personal symbols for Art Quilt Collage, you're going to be making a ready-to-frame small Art Quilt Collage incorporating a personal symbol. This one has stones as a personal symbol, and there's some more workshop samples back here behind me. So let's start with fabric selection. You are going to need 6 to 10 different fabrics. I'm going to show you some samples of what I call fabric palettes. These have 9 fabrics in them. I have started, here's the first one, let's take a look at it. So I start with a focus fabric, in this case a medium scale, relatively narrow palette in that it goes from light blue to dark purple, but it doesn't have a whole bunch of colors in it. And then I built the rest of the palette around this focus fabric, really striving to make sure that I have some dark darks and some light lights. So let's take a look at each one just so you can kind of get an idea of what I'm taking into consideration in building this palette. So there's the focus fabric. And here we have a light with a super subtle light blue grid that's going to provide great contrast. Here's a gray in a tone-on-tone medium scale print, also a relatively light fabric. Here's a dark in navy with this subtle grid printed on it. Here's a small, teeny tiny tone-on-tone medium blue, which is going to be a nice contrast. I love a dot. So here's a navy with a white dot. And then here we have a relatively large scale print, which is going to be super fun to potentially fussy cut and do some interesting design kind of fun details with that. So a larger scale print can be a good addition. Here's a very plain, subtle, mottled solid in lavender, and then another subtle, this one a dark, it's sort of a stripe, but it's really subtle, navy and purple. So those are the 9 fabrics that this particular palette includes. And let me show you also what embroidery threads I would select for this particular palette, because you're also going to be including in your supplies a selection of threads for hand embroidery. So again, here are just anything goes, embroidery floss, pearl cotton, whatever you have. Half-used skeins, leftovers, all is going to work just perfectly fine. So again, dark darks and light lights. So I've chosen a navy and a white that are going to provide good contrast. And then I threw in a pop of color here with this fuchsia. Though the fuchsia is not in the fabric palette, it might be a really fun addition and a cool design option to consider when we get to the hand stitching stage. So those are the suggested embroidery, hand embroidery threads that I would bring with this collection. All right, let's look at some other fabric palettes just so you can get an idea of a different way to build up your fabrics. Now remember, we're talking about 6 to 10 fabrics, and you are going to be cutting them to about 6 by 8 inches. That's going to be perfectly adequate. Now, if you have a bunch of scraps and you want to build your palette from scraps, and some of them are 6 by 8, and some of them are 10 by 10, and some of them are 5 by 5, totally fine. You really want to keep it in the total number of fabrics, 6 to 10, and that will help you focus on design and not be distracted by too many fabric choices. And also, all of your fabrics ideally are pre-fused before the workshop. Now I've created another tutorial for pre-fusing your fabrics, so check the link below on how to pre-fuse your fabrics so that when we kick off the workshop, you are ready to get straight into the design work. All right, so here is another fabric palette sample. Same leafy print, this one in a neutral palette, and I love neutrals. Don't run away or think that neutrals are boring. This can be a really fun palette to work with. Let's look at each one. There's the leaf. Here's a tone on tone. See the subtle branch print in white. Again, light lights are going to provide good contrast. Here's a relatively light gray print, small scale print. Another light, this one a really nice tan. And don't be afraid to mix off-white and white. They can be wonderful neutrals that work great together. A little bit darker tan with a leaf print, tone on tone, but with quite a lot of texture there. And in these small pieces that we're working on, even a small tone on tone, a small print can really be an interesting detail to the eye. I love a stripe, so there's a stripe, a maroon for some color, a nice mottled brown, and then a dark, little piece of thread there, a dark, in this case, a black with a cool, again, tone on tone print. So there's another fabric palette to consider for your inspiration. I have one more fabric palette I want to share with you. This one is much more colorful. So don't be afraid to use color, and don't be afraid to use a lot of colors. When you're working with a palette, as long as you're working with them all together, everything's gonna kind of relate to each other. So this was the focus fabric that I chose for this collection, this kind of cool galaxy print, which is full of color. All right, let's look at each piece. So there's the focus fabric, the galaxy. This is just plain Jane, black solid. Really great contrast, very practical, easy to use, definitely useful. And then for the white, I chose this dotted white. So we've got our dark in the black and our light with the white. Here is again a medium scale print that might be fun to fussy cut. So a lavender. I love a stripe. Always consider throwing a stripe into your fabric palette. In this case, a tone on tone yellow. Here's another print that might be fun for fussy cutting. In this case, a large scale tone on tone in pink. A lavender dot with a white background. So not really tone on tone. Here we're getting the lavender and the white in one piece of fabric, double duty. A cool teal, and then a navy mottled solid. So that is another fabric palette for you to consider and take inspiration from. The next thing I want to talk to you about is preparing your batting. You need 6 pieces of batting that are cut to approximately 6 by 8 inches. Your finished pieces are going to be 5 by 7, but we want the batting to be slightly larger than that. So go for about 6 by 8. It does not have to be exact. This is acrylic felt, which I love building my collages on. So 6 by 8 inch acrylic felt pieces. Batting also fine, batting scraps perfectly fine. You need 6 of those, so get those prepared ahead of time. And the last thing that I want you to prepare ahead of time is a design window. You are going to love this tool for composition. It's really going to help you zero in on design decisions. So this is just a piece of cardstock with a 5 by 7 window cut out of the center. So prepare that ahead of time. Don't hesitate to email me if you have any questions about preparing for your personal symbols for Art Quilt Collage workshop. I'm totally looking forward to seeing you there.